that compute value chain is quite complex because you've got real estate developers that build the data centers, then the utility firms that power them, to the semiconductor firms that obviously produce the chips, and then the iCloud hyperscalers, that host trillions and trillions of terabytes of data. So there is this huge money trail and interconnected web of where the money is needed for this infrastructure build out. They've had to get some debt financing. These huge companies that have got trillions of cash, they've had to go and get debt financing in order to build this infrastructure. And Meta made 200 billion last year. It's going to spend over that to build out its infrastructure. Those are bonkers numbers. And then Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, came out and said that they would need 250 gigawatts of compute power by 2033. That is the current energy usage of India, the most populated country on this planet. So that's just OpenAI. That doesn't even include the big tech firms that we've spoken about already. If we don't have a sovereign tech company that is so strong on AI that it could take that data responsibly and use it for the benefit of society, we will have to give that data over to either the East or the West. And it will probably go over to the US. And then what happens when they start to charge us a subscription model to get given the results of that data? The NHS, from a budgetary point of view, is already crippled and on its knees. And yet we're giving it away to others to then hold us sort of to ransom.
Welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ashley Braganza, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Tom Parker, an independent journalist, to this episode, who works in and has commented extensively on AI and AI adoption. Tom, welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. Before we go much further, if I could ask you to introduce yourself and give my listeners a little bit of background about you and some of the work that you've done in AI.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. It's an absolute pleasure to be on the show. We've, of course, have been reversed in our roles before because you've been on one of my podcasts that I do for the Financial Times, which is called The Next Five. It's all about the next 5 years in different industries. I launched that about 5 years ago, actually. And throughout the progression of the podcast, we talk about lots of different de rigueur topics that can affect our day-to-day. And of course, AI in the last few years has been something that everyone has been talking about. So I had the pleasure of interviewing you on that one. So it's lovely to be on the other side of the table. I'm looking forward to this one. I've also worked for other organizations like the Centre for European Policy Studies, where I've hosted their podcast on AI, on anything from the impact on the future of work to how it really affects our day-to-day. And then I've also done a series with law firms like Baker McKenzie and even accountancy sort of bodies on how AI is going to impact. So yeah, it's very much a part of what I seem to research and talk about and think about often. So really fascinated and excited to jump into this topic with you today.
Tom, thank you so much for that introduction. Look, there is all this talk about there being an AI bubble and some wild valuations about the organizations that are at the heart of AI. And I just wondered if you could kind of reflect on, are we in a bubble and what's the nature of this bubble at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. There is obviously much talk of a bubble. And I think a lot of commentators out there are saying that this bubble could burst this year, or it could burst in 5 years. It's not very helpful for anyone. But I've heard of this particular phrase being like, it's a Teflon coated bubble, as in it's so strong at the moment and it seems to be absorbing so much because there have been really quite high price to earning ratios. So the earnings of a particular company versus the price of the stock at the moment. And NVIDIA a couple of years ago was at 60 times the price versus earnings, and that's future forward looking, and that's high. That is very high. It's actually mellowed out around the mid 20s at the moment. That's sort of similar to your big four hyperscalers, your Meta, your Microsoft, your Google, your Amazon, which are around the mid 20s to the late 20s. That's what everyone would suggest is a good sort of valuation and a good PE ratio. And in comparison, if we look back to 2019, which was the dot-com era, which everyone was sort of spooked about, your big seven stocks, your big seven tech stocks at the time were averaging around the mid 60s PE. So that might give an indication of where we are at the moment. But I would say that when we actually want to understand whether there's a bubble or not, it really does come down to the adoption of AI. Because at the moment, there is a lot of money that is being put out there by these big tech startups and with the big tech hyperscalers. And there's a lot of money moving around, but there's a sort of chicken and the egg, because essentially the money in these contracts need to be realized by a huge infrastructure build out that was so much bigger and potentially even larger than anything we've ever seen before, and definitely much more than what was in the dot-com era. And so that infrastructure and all of that money that is being kicked around, I think is a really interesting kind of look at where we might be when it comes to a bubble.
And I guess part of that infrastructure, part of that investment is around the infrastructure, as you just mentioned. And clearly there's a big emphasis at the moment on data centers, and certainly the UK's AI plan and strategy is around building out some data centers, and equally other countries are now very keen to put up data centers. I mean, how are all these data centers going to be funded, and what are some of the implications of these data centers?
Yeah, look, there are around 11,000 data centers globally, and that's up 500% over the past 20 years. McKinsey, I think, predicts about $7 trillion of capital is needed by 2030 to build data centers. And that's to keep up with what we think is the current compute demand. Morgan Stanley puts it at about 3 trillion by 2028. So there's obviously in that 2-year difference, it's going to need to double. We've got more data centers, we've got more AI as a future part of our society. And the thing is that compute value chain is quite complex, because you've got real estate developers that build the data centers, then the utility firms that power them, to the semiconductor firms that obviously produce the chips, and then the iCloud hyperscalers, that host trillions and trillions of terabytes of data. So there is this huge money trail and interconnected web of where the money is needed for this infrastructure build out. And the issue here is that big money bets are being made now on how many data centers are going to be required. If you build too many of them, then you've got stranded assets. And it takes a lot to build these, and there's a lot of permitting, and there's a lot of time, and there's a lot of policy that goes around it, and there's a lot of expense. There's a lot of space. I mean, in the UK has got a much harder issue when it comes to building data centers than you do have in the US. By the way, the US is leading in that 11,000 figure, by the way. China is massively catching up. And then if you don't invest enough, then you're going to fall short, and you're going to fall behind your competition. And I think, again, if we look at those big four hyperscalers, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, for example, they're expected to spend over 100 billion each this year on infrastructure build out. That's 50% of their revenue of last year, 50% of their revenue. So they've had to get some debt financing. These huge companies that have got trillions of cash, they've had to go and get debt financing in order to build this infrastructure. And Meta made 200 billion last year. It's going to spend over that to build out its infrastructure. Those are bonkers numbers, and I think we just need to get our heads around that a little bit.
I mean, you're absolutely right. The numbers are eye-watering. I mean, how are these companies likely to sustain this level of investment over time? I mean, in some ways, I guess the question I'm wondering is, Is this investment ever going to end, or is this just a huge amount over a period of time?
It's a great question. I think that they have to. There's a certain amount of hype around this, and the big AI players are creating that hype because they have to, because they're investing so much of it. I look back at the fact that Facebook was called Facebook and then it became Meta because there was this huge investment into the metaverse. I'm not quite sure what's happened to the metaverse. I'm not sure anyone else listening has. It was sort of there and predicting a future where everyone was going to have this virtual world where we all live in and you can buy real estate and all these sorts of things. And that's sort of just quietened down a bit. And so, they lost out on that investment into the metaverse. They've kept the name, and now it's all on AI. And I think because there's so much money moving around in all of this, there is this hype, and it just has to be realized. Because otherwise, there's some of the big tech companies in the world are really going to struggle. I also wonder about OpenAI a little bit. And again, I know nothing. I'm not a financial analyst. Please don't take this as read. But I think back to when we were looking at the search engines that came out, and it was around .com and all these sorts of things. We used to have Lycos, Ask Jeeves, if anyone can remember those. There were some early adopters. There were some first-time players out there, and then Google came along, right? And I know that there are other, and I should mention there are other search engines still available, like Bing and Firefox and all that sort of stuff. But Google is a word in the dictionary now. We all use it. It's a part of our society. And I just wonder whether OpenAI, because it doesn't have this huge backing, and huge history of the other big tech firms that have now caught up. I just wonder where that's going to be in a year's time, maybe 2 years. Does everyone that uses OpenAI end up going to your Google Gemini or some of the other bigger ones because they can actually build out all the infrastructure bigger and better, and they can survive in case those contracts don't get realized at the time they require for that revenue?
Yeah, it's interesting because clearly these companies are making these investments, and you can see governments are kind of almost encouraging them to come in and set up data centers and to set up the infrastructure in the various parts of the world, in part because there is a demand in society for AI. Show me a person that is not using ChatGPT to organize their holidays and organize. And I guess I should also say there are other LLMs available other than ChatGPT. But people are using this not just for work, but at home and in their social lives. We know about the use of LLMs in terms of befriending people and becoming, counselors. So there is a demand in society. What's the longer term impact, do you think, of AI being so widespread in society?
There's always a pro and a con, and I think that when I speak to lots of different people, some are more pessimistic. Some think that the hype is real and that actually it's not going to deliver. I interviewed Darren Acemoglu, who is a Nobel laureate in economics and has got a huge amount of knowledge around AI, and does think that there's a big hype around that. I interviewed him mid last year, so his mind may have changed, but I don't think so. But then you've got lots of others that do see the absolute benefit of it and do see it as being interwoven into our society. And I think that if we start looking at the potential impact it can have on health, for example, on crunching huge amounts of data, and seeing patterns, and couple that maybe with quantum computing in the future, I think is going to be fascinating. But yeah, it is becoming more and more intertwined with our day-to-day lives, whether it's our personal, whether it's our professional. There have been some interesting discussions about how you can use it professionally in lots of different arenas. It's affected the software companies of late in the last few weeks, because the software companies that specifically sell a software to consultancy firms and legal firms have had Anthropic's Claude come out and offer something that does it much quicker and better by the sounds of it. And so I think that your adoption for a tech that is much easier and quicker and more efficient, as long as we get over some of the pessimism around perhaps data and integrity and hallucinations, and whether that AI should be trusted without the human in the loop, I don't think it should, then I think that the adoption will continue. But just like with anything, the adoption has to get in society, in work, in culture, has to get over those road bumps. And I don't think it perhaps is going to happen as quickly as the hyperscalers and the AIs want it to happen, or in fact need it to happen. But that's just my view.
What are some of the risks, that AI poses at a societal level?
I don't want to dwell on this part of the answer too much, but it does need to be mentioned, which is around grok and images. That's just disgusting. Everyone should know about that. And I think that then the moment the response from grok and Elon Musk and the team was just to make the disgusting nature of those images a premium feature, I think this is just horrific. And I think that, all governments should be really hot on that and say, look, we've got to really take care of the most vulnerable in our society. If AI could help upskill and get everyone generally, moving up within society, then great. But we've really got to see the antithesis to that. So I would just say that I don't think it needs to be covered anymore. There are some other specific risks. And if we move from LLMs to pixel AI, for example, which is obviously the AI that is used to look at images, you could go and talk about copyright. You could talk about artistic integrity, all of those particular things. But actually, again, looking back at health, there's a great example of how pixel AI is now being used in radiotherapy to look at melanoma, which is skin cancer. And it now has a 97% accuracy, which is 1% more than a top specialist doctor or clinician. And that percentage was already hit, I think, a year and a half ago, too, perhaps. So the accuracy was already there. There is always an issue about the AI is only as ever good as the data that feeds it. So with that pixel AI accuracy, it was only as good as the textbooks and the images that had been fed from it historically. And so there was already a racist bias in that data that was fed. So the 97% accuracy was only good on Caucasian skin. And it couldn't notice any other race anywhere near that accuracy. So you need to have that expert clinician in that loop to realize that there is a bias there. And so actually then to solve that, what we need to do is we need to be collecting more data on every single race, gender, whatever it might be within that to create that data set. So I think that's really important. Then obviously we've got hallucinations, we've got errors that come out from the types of questions that you might ask it. But I think that's where the human expert is obviously of critical importance.
Another big area in terms of AI is clearly the energy that's needed to run these data centers. What are your thoughts in terms of the energy discussions and debates that are going on in terms of AI?
Yeah, we need a huge amount. I think it was in November last year that OpenAI released a statement that said they needed 30 gigawatts of compute capacity to just move over the next year. And they said that they were going to employ about a gigawatt per week of compute power. 30 gigawatts, by the way, is a third of peak demand of the US grid. So that's already a crazy number to get your head around. And then Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, came out and said that they would need 250 gigawatts of compute power by 2033. That is the current energy usage of India, the most populated country on this planet. So that's just OpenAI. That doesn't even include the big tech firms that we've spoken about already. So when we start thinking about the huge compute power that is needed, it's sort of crazy. It's not quite fathomable, these sorts of numbers. Also, Sam Altman's 250 gigawatts in 2033 is going to require 30 million GPUs. The GPUs are the chips that NVIDIA make, for example, and others. And that's just to keep it running. And that will produce twice as much CO2 as ExxonMobil does at the moment. So there's some really huge energy demands, and there's really big energy questions about how we're going to create these particular energy demands or meet them. And I said at the start that 1 gigawatt was needed a week for OpenAI. A gigawatt is the equivalent power output of a small to medium-sized nuclear power plant. So you need 30 of those just to power OpenAI. And then how long does it take to build any of these nuclear power plants? You know, it's 10 to 15 years in the UK or the West. China's actually about 7. But how are we going to is this another chicken and the egg, essentially? We've got to have the power capacity because we've got grids that aren't efficient and aren't working, and the huge power demand is already required. And I think that is really quite a scary thought. And if the energy providers have to build out so much more capacity, where's that cost really going to hit? And I think it's going to hit the consumer, because your energy prices are going to go up the moment your demand goes up. And so there's a big trail here that is quite intimidating if we look from a whole energy perspective.
I mean, energy is clearly an absolutely significant part of running AI and getting AI to be available for people and companies to adopt it. But the other big debate that's going on, Tom, is around sovereignty. I just wondered if you could maybe reflect on this whole issue of sovereignty. Is this an East versus West issue? Clearly, what are your thoughts in terms of AI sovereignty, which is a big part of the UK government's agenda?
Yeah, I'd like to start with UK because I've done a lot of discussion around policy in the EU, and there's already discussion around EU sovereignty. But I want to start with the UK because we have got amazing academics and amazing institutions, educational institutions that have partnered really well with industry. And so we have had a history of creating some incredible tech companies. The problem around sovereignty is investment and access to it. Now London, from a VC and a private equity point of view, really does rate very highly on getting access to capital to build out tech companies quickly. But if we think that DeepMind was such a huge poster child for the AI revolution a decade ago, I think it was the first company to beat was it AlphaGo? And that was just a fun way of putting it on the map, but it obviously does incredible things and lots of amazing things in healthcare. That was then bought by Google. And so the sovereignty of that particular tech has then gone to America. And America already has an amazing Silicon Valley that is producing incredible tech giants. And I feel like there's been a brain drain of talent and of tech over to the US in the last decade that we really need to try and keep within the UK. Then if you look at Europe, you've got Mistral, which is their big tech superstar. They have been discussing how they want to obviously stay within France and support an EU sovereignty on tech. Again, it's difficult in the EU because access to capital is very different to the US. The US is coast-to-coast funding. They are one whole unit when it comes to the movement of money. You've got 27 jurisdictions in Europe. And I think that makes it very difficult to either raise individually within a country or to continue to raise across it. And they are trying to create lots of different innovation hubs across Europe. But there are difficulties there to try and keep that sovereignty. But then I also want to come back to healthcare again with the NHS and the UK, because the NHS has got something that is so amazingly valuable that nowhere else on the world has, which is data on each individual citizen from the moment they're born to the moment they pass. And if we don't have a sovereign tech company that is so strong on AI that it could take that data responsibly and use it for the benefit of society, we will have to give that data over to either the East or the West. And it will probably go over to the US. And then what happens when they start to charge us a subscription model to get given the results of that data? The NHS, from a budgetary point of view, is already crippled and on its knees, and yet we're giving it away to others to then hold us sort of to ransom. in 2023, there was a contract, a £330 million contract signed with Palantir, which is the AI firm that's sort of linked to the military over in the US. It's got links to Israel as well. Lots of different military contracts out there. There is now talk about trying to stop that contract at the moment with the NHS and Palantir. And it was to try, Palantir were to build an AI system to aggregate all of the data in the NHS. So those conversations have already been had, and now we're trying to sort of reverse them. But I don't know whether there's anyone that can fill the void. So I think that's a really interesting place to be looking at. And we certainly need to support more homegrown talent, more homegrown investment, and more homegrown tech. That's the UK and Europe if we're really going to survive, because we are stuck right bang in the middle between two superpowers, the East and the West, and we are far, far too behind, far too far behind.
Yes, thank you. Really interesting insights there, Tom. Because I guess what that also leads on to is, this whole notion of the ethical and responsible use of AI. I mean, what does that mean if we in the UK don't have control over our data, and certainly don't have any control over the foundation models that everyone's using?
I think that fundamentally, if you are a good government and a good individual and a good society, ethics has to be the first thing that is discussed when there is any new technology that is having an impact. We could discuss the ethics of the current energy mix and the impact on the environment. When there are technologies out there that make society easier and better, we've got to discuss the ethics. We don't even need to touch on it much, but just AI in autonomous vehicles, there's an ethical question there. Yes. It's the three trolley problem that I think was by Emily Foote, I apologize if I got that wrong, back in the 1960s, posed a problem about whether there's some train tracks and about whether one person dies or many people die. Excuse me. Now, I think the ethics of having AI automate lots of our decisions in life has to be a part of the fabric of all of our discussions of it. Something that ethics even comes into how we use it in the workplace. A few days ago, one of the top 4 consultancies, and I can't remember which one, and so I won't say it, there was a test on how to use AI internally within the workplace. And a few senior directors used AI to answer the AI questions. So there's an integrity element here. And they obviously got found out, and they've been fined money, $7,000 I think, off the top of my head. So, there are issues about how people use it, how it's built, the data that goes into it, as I discussed earlier. And I'm actually really proud of where Europe sits when it comes to regulation and ethics, because it has been at the forefront of regulating the industry. Some will argue that's why it may have stifled innovation. And the US certainly will say that if there's too much regulation, then you're going to stifle innovation. And there might be even less regulation under the Trump administration, which is even scarier. So I think that I'm proud of where we are from a regulation and ethics point of view in Europe. I think that you can still deregulate without losing the integrity of ethics in order to allow innovation. But it is a really difficult balancing act. But let's hope that we get it right.
And I guess the other big area for AI is around work and the impact on jobs. What are your thoughts in terms of the impact of AI in terms of the future of work, Tom?
I think it really depends which industry you're in. I've mentioned healthcare before. I think it could even help when it comes to the energy sector. If you can more efficiently find ways of creating energy efficiency, if you can crunch data much better, you could help the environment. It could help the environment when we're looking at social impacts, environmental impacts around the world. I think that individuals can use AI to crunch data to come out with better understandings and visualizations, which means that you can do things on a budget. I wouldn't say cheaply, but you can do more with less. And I think when you're looking at NGOs, when you're looking at smaller, medium-sized enterprises, you can create a much more efficient workforce. And if we look at what technology has done throughout the ages, this is what everyone calls the fourth industrial revolution. You know, you've had technology that has made your life easier. We've just had to understand how to use that tool. I want to go back to that Pixel AI that I spoke about earlier, because some doctors could be extremely frustrated that there is this tool that comes in that is 1% better than them. But in the healthcare space, there's been huge amounts of innovation when it comes to tools that can allow doctors and medics to do better at their job. And I think it was back in the 80s where there was an MRI machine that came in, which is this magnetic resonance imaging. It was actually also called NMR. And the slang at the time for that acronym was no more radiologists. That's what they thought was going to happen when this tool came in. But it clearly didn't. It just made them better and more efficient. And I think that that's exactly what AI can do if you use it properly. From my own personal experience working in my industry, I'm a journalist. I speak to people. Tech has been amazing. If I think that before the pandemic, we have to fly everywhere to chat to someone. We're doing this virtually. I'm in Mexico. You're in London. That's come from the adoption of high quality video and audio. So that allows me to do my job well. AI, from my point of view, is going to really change, I think, especially when it comes to podcasts. I host podcasts. My research can take a few days to do in order to be able to really get to the crux of a particular topic and industry, and to really understand what I think are the movements that have happened before and are going to happen. With AI, you could have a marketing executive straight out of university, straight out of school, on a starter's salary, within half an hour has created a podcast script, as long as they check sources and they do their job well, that could do my job. I don't want to talk myself out of a job, but at least to a really good level. And then now there is a discussion about the quality of voices. You know, someone could essentially try and say, oh, I like Tom's voice, let's make something similar. And then that voice is now being used. So it could absolutely have an effect on the number of people that could employ me as an independent journalist to go around and host and produce their podcasts. But I think that, you know, there's a good thing there because it allows more people to be able to get their voice out there. I think there will be a premium when it comes to the human element of it. So if someone does want Tom to come on and host their podcast, then they can do that. But certainly for everyone else, it can allow you as a smaller organization to get an upskill. So I think that's really interesting. And actually, I want to go back on the AI ethics question around voices, because now there is the quality of voice. What should I say? The quality of how someone can impersonate your voice is crazy. It's up between the 80s and 90% accuracy. And that really calls into question things around cybersecurity, around voice cloning, around gaining access to companies' information by suggesting that you are one of the executives and you call up someone and you ask for the bank transfer, et cetera, et cetera. There is a real danger there on the same flip side of allowing a company to create a podcast. All you need now is 3 seconds of my voice to clone my voice. 2 years ago, you needed 3 minutes. So that is a crazy example of where the tech has come and potentially where it might go.
Tom, thank you so much for a really fascinating discussion on some incredibly big topics. I have to say, when we started this conversation, I wasn't expecting us to cover anywhere near the sorts of range of topics that we did. Everything from, you know, is AI a bubble, and what is going to happen with this issue around energy, and what are some of the big challenges that you know, the industry, the sector faces in terms of generating sufficient energy to be able to deliver on the promises, the impact on society, ethical and you know, responsible AI debates, and finally looking at the future of work and the implications. And thank you so much for sharing your own personal experience in terms of how this technology has not only impacted you, but how it may well impact you in the future. Tom, thank you for joining me on the AI Adoption Podcast. Thank you for your openness and your frankness in some of your responses. I really appreciate that. And I'd like to thank my listeners, and I hope you enjoyed this episode as well.
Ashley, it's been an absolute pleasure being here. I've really loved delving into the depths that is AI. And you're right, it's really difficult to break this down. It's such a big topic. It affects everything. It affects everyone. And I just hope that everyone enjoyed listening to it. And it's been a really great fun being on the other side of the microphone.